listening to Pharmacy, IT, and Me, your informatics pharmacist podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Pharmacy, IT, and Me podcast. I'm your host, Tony Dow, and on today's episode, we have a very special guest, one of my good friends and colleague, Dr. Beju Shah. Hey Beju, how are you doing?
Hey Tony, how's it going? Thanks for having me on the show.
We've been planning this for a long time. So
I
finally,
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been far too long. I've been kind of, to be fair to Tony here, everyone who's listening in, I've been actually pushing off getting on his show for a while, just because it's been super busy in health tech. But we can get it right into all of that.
Yeah. So Beju, I've known Beju for a number of years now. We met at ASHP, and now like Beju. When I met Beju, he was in pharmacy informatics specifically, and now he's jumped over to the health tech side. And I'm really interested in learning more about that because honestly, I don't know exactly what you do nowadays. So it is kind of cool in a way that we push this this recording so far. In the future, because now you're in a completely new role that I'm also very interested in learning about. So, but yeah,
Tony, that was funny you say that because, when we met at ASHP Media, which was many moons ago, frankly, we met because we had this mutual kind of professional role in common, and we understood what each other does. I said I was in pharmacy informatics, and you're like, okay, that's great, so am I, or vice versa, right? And it was one of those things where we get it, but it's funny when you mention what we do to friends and family members, perhaps it's not often the case. So when you said, you don't really know what I do right now, that's kind of, I had to kind of smile a little bit because, I still get that, just in a different context. So yeah, so let's get into it. I've been a pharmacist probably about a decade, largely working at academic medical centers, and I one specifically at MUSC in Charleston that I worked for a number of years, and then also when I jumped out of MUSC, also worked with some vendors that also worked with large health systems as well. And so very familiar both on the health system side and on the vendor side, how to sort of work with different partners and different stakeholders within health systems. So that's been a quite interesting journey. I will say also, I have been an adjunct faculty member and a mentor for a number of years as well. And so I still enjoy that part of my, role and professional duty, so to speak. And I think that kind of segues really nicely into what, Tony, I, as well as David Vu and Brian Fung have built, which is the Pharmacy Informatics Academy. And so there's a little bit of, I would say, an innovator's mindset within this. And so throughout my journey, I've always tried to figure out how to solve the problem for my customer or for my user in a way that sort of is able to be a bit outside the box and to also feed into those kind of roles that I spoke about.
yeah. Like I know that you started in pharmacy informatics, like clinical informatics and things like that. But like just so the listeners kind of understand, when you decided to go into pharmacy and you went through pharmacy school, was that already something on your mind, or how'd you learn about like that space of technology intersecting with healthcare?
Yeah, great question. So basically, the sort of attraction I was to healthcare really was around personal stories. But one being that a lot of my family members and relatives had actually gone through really bad experiences in healthcare, and so providing access to quality care has always been top of mind for me. But interestingly enough, this was not my first career. My first career actually I was planned to be in IT, and actually I started out very early on in IT. Uh, Unfortunately, it was around the same time as a dot-com bubble bust. Around 2000, 2001 is when I kind of, entered that domain, and I had to rethink it because, obviously I was competing against folks in the industry that were also looking for jobs and had many years of experience. And so I pivoted. I actually pivoted, and I did look back at healthcare, and I said, pharmacy sounds like a great space. And so it's kind of come back full circle right now, which is where I landed, in the intersection of pharmacy and tech. So that's a kind of a neat little short story of how I got into pharmacy, as a second career, but, ultimately, I was able to merge the 2 domains in my
You know,
current role.
that's really interesting because with not I don't really talk about this much, but, like, for me, like, in undergrad, right? Like, just from the very start of undergrad, I didn't really know what I was gonna do. I really was interested in technology and IT,
Mm,
but then it was more of like, familial pressure, like, "Hey, go into healthcare. Hey, pharmacy is a great career that's stable." So then, starting from undergrad, then I went into doing, like, biology as a major and just had my mindset on, going to pharmacy school. But still in the back of my mind, I still really enjoy technology. So it's kind of funny, like, and that's around the same time too, as the dot com bubble, like a little bit later, when it busted. So, but it was like the beginning of Facebook time, right? So
right.
at that time, IT was still like, oh, you're not going to get a job. But that's before Facebook went big and all that stuff. And yeah, so it's kind of like not the same as you, but kind of like a similar like way of thinking about it, I guess, in my undergrad years. So, and then, like, of course, I'm also like where you are today, like, merging the 2 in my main path right now. So yeah, I just
Exactly.
think it's like really cool, really funny how things work out.
It really is, and, just to kind of for folks listening in as well, that are starting out or very early on in the stage of career building, and professional development, some of this takes time. You don't have to really expect to be in certain roles in a year or 2. Like, it could be a decade-long plan, but ultimately, just kind of knowing that you have a lot of ways to kind of find that runway and then find those opportunities and reach that goal. So just something to keep in mind. But sometimes it takes patience and perseverance.
So, like looking at your career journey, kind of going off on that too, like you had quite a lot of different experiences. I know that you said you started off, not being in the pharmacy side, then you went to do pharmacy. I see that you also got your MBA. And how has, your MBA studies kind of like helped out or, contributed to what you're able to do in your field today?
Yeah, great question. It's a nice kind of segue into, kind of day-to-day role and current role as well, because a lot of this, I think a lot of the experiences I've had with the MBA program have lent itself really well into um, looking at return on investment, essentially. So whether it's, going into the EHR, building out a order set or some decision support tool, or even some sort of automation, right? We built a number of automations in my time at MUSC. Some of them actually have been patented, so I've got intellectual property around of them. But all that kind of goes back to like the tools from the MBA that have helped achieve that. So looking at return on investment, looking at sort of how you measure value, how you look at kind of business models even, and how do you kind of look at outcomes in sort of outcomes management sort of ways where it can impact the customer or the user, I think is really important. And then also communication skills within that. So how do you market these technologies? How do you pitch these technologies to your decision makers or your buyers, right? And so there's a lot of like these, I would say, business skills or financial skills that are involved in some of that. And it's not necessarily something you learn at in perhaps pharmacy school, but it's certainly a good way. If you have, let's say, a dual PharmD MBA program at your college or at your institution, that's a great way to kind of get some of those skills. So Tony, what about you? I mean, have you sort of had a pretty significant impact with your MBA?
Yeah, actually, going through the MBA program allowed me to get more practice on doing value stream mapping, and that's been very useful.
Hmm.
So we have oncology EHR at our organization, and there was an ask to show why we should continue this and why this is something that is beneficial to the institution and justify its cost. So that's when I straight up, like, I was still in the program, my MBA program, and learning about value stream mapping, and I just straight up just applied it right then and there. So we like our team just took out the entire oncology process of like from paper and then value stream mapped everything out and then showed the improvement in time saved, patient safety, all that stuff with the implementation of the oncology EHR. So for me, immediately I had like some outcome benefit from like learning it in the MBA program and applying it immediately to work. So I thought it was, like, really cool because I didn't really think about those kind of things before, like, going through a business program like that, and that allowed me to have, like, a new lens on things, and it's really helpful.
It's actually interesting you say that because, like, I've talked to a number of, pharmacist professionals that actually have gone through MBA program while they're at work, and I hear similar stories. In fact, I would argue that that's probably the best way to learn is to learn and apply it and sort of, go through that process. You actually retain perhaps more information, and maybe learn a bit more, about yourself and insights about, what your work is about, through the process of going through it. So, I will say the value stream mapping is really something I've held on to as well for quite some time and applied it in my practice. So, um, for the last probably year or so, I've worked as a it's sort of in a customer manager or a customer success manager role. And that really entails how do we deliver value and optimize for existing customers, and how do we look at their outcomes and goals as we do that? Part of those, components involve how do we engage with the customer? How do we, create quarterly business reviews? Let's say, for example, with the executives in that account, how do we measure the accounts, and keep a tab on it by monitoring its utilization through analytics? And then how do we make sure we offer the right support, whether it's onboarding or training or, all of the above sort of upselling features, really kind of looking at what is the customer needing and how can we deliver it, and then documenting all of that and going through that cycle again every year. So that sort of account management or customer success role is something that I think is it's a really great way for pharmacists to add value, or anyone in healthcare, like any healthcare professional to add value to, because often in health tech, you have health systems needing to drive some sort of value and showcase that to their leadership. And being in this customer success role, you're able to look at their perspective, figure out what their needs are, but also within that context of, their workflows and their systems, you're able to actually understand a little bit more fully than folks without that healthcare experience. And then you're able to then fully assess your solution that, you're expert in, and figure out how to best solve for their problems. And each account is very unique. I worked with accounts that are very, very large, IDNs or large academic medical centers around the country, all the way through to startups and health tech companies that are on the smaller but leaner side of things, and perhaps even more agile than their counterparts. So, but every single time I have a conversation with them, it's always about what are the values you're seeking, for us to deliver, and what are your goals and outcomes, and then how can we work, and partner together and align on those.
Yeah, and
Now,
so for the
yeah,
people who are listening right now, just so we can throw this in there to put some context, your role's title is a senior telehealth success manager, right?
that's right. Less of the senior, Tony. That less of the senior, please.
Okay, okay. But
No, but
yeah.
just joking aside, yeah, that's exactly my role. And so, in fact, I've still retained that title, but I am currently in a new role, which is working with our content marketing team. So, um, in my previous role, it was really more about kind of what happens after the sale and after we acquire a customer, and then how do we ensure we retain them? How do we ensure we're meeting their goals, right? Their expectations. My current role is more early stage. It's actually, before us even a sale is made. It's more about awareness, and it kind of speaks to my educator hat. I've always had sort of, um, a joy for educating other healthcare professionals, and this really fits in well because what we're trying to do is we're trying to help guide the healthcare administrator or the provider, essentially any of our, potential customers, and guide them onto how to be successful in telehealth. Why is telehealth key, essentially? So that's kind of my new role, and we can get into that a little bit. So yeah, so part of my content marketing role today is really around creating a strategy for our thought leadership campaigns, and so this is where I think being a pharmacist comes in really handy because what we're trying to establish and what we hope to kind of create in very soon in 2024 is the Telehealth Success Institute. And so my subject matter expertise in health systems in healthcare is pretty crucial to that because what we're looking at is creating content around and educational content really around telehealth trends, some research that's really pointed towards uh, you know topics like prescribing, substance use disorders, drug diversion, and then we're looking at best practices. How can clinicians use these different use cases that we're planning to share in their own practice, and how do they become successful models within their health system. So there's a lot within that takes place. It's going to conferences and events, speaking at industry events, giving educational talks, some public relations, working with journalists, researchers, media outlets, and then also, frankly, perhaps partnering with other companies, business development, and maybe some market research and intelligence out of that too. And so this is where, again, this is where it's helpful to know how healthcare works from the inside out. And as a pharmacist, with a decade long experience at health systems, I think that's where a lot of really good context comes into play because I can, I can easily share with my marketing team or I can share with my some of my product team, these are the important sort of insights that you need to know about so that you can either stay more competitive in the industry or something that we can partner someone we can partner with to perhaps increase our reach so we can educate more clinicians or there's all these different things that we can do but it's really a it becomes how do we make sure that we're kind of rowing the right way how do we make sure we're driving the right feature or how do we make sure we're talking about the right topic at a webinar and it takes sort of that clinician's mindset to filter out what we shouldn't do and what we probably should kind of focus on because there's a lot of things frankly to do there's a lot of opportunities to work on. It's really trying to figure out what is impactful for clinicians ultimately, and how do we best serve them.
That kind of segues into like something else that I was wondering about. And, obviously COVID-19 really pushed telehealth to the forefront. And, all these companies came up with like new things, ways to like kind of push telehealth to the masses pretty much. And, everything's changing fast, exponentially.
It
Like
is.
how do you guys keep up with the changes? Because, I went through some courses through my certificate program. There was some telehealth medicine stuff,
Mhm.
but the books we use, they're already outdated and it's only been like a
Yeah,
few years. So
yeah, that's a great
how do you
question.
guys keep up with that?
That's such a great question. In fact, and so this is actually this is exactly why we're building the Telehealth Success Institute. And I want to give some of your audience a little bit more information about that because I think it's really important to understand. During COVID, everything blew up. I mean, blew up meaning everything really kind of was in this very fast, chaotic pace of adoption. Especially in telehealth, there were health systems just like scrambling to get hold of virtual care tools so they could use them for their patients because obviously in-person visits and things of this nature were reduced and or they were just removed from the workflow and so administrators had to figure out how to do these things and so it was a time of chaos. It was a time of like, a lot of non-standardized workflows and maybe some non-compliant technologies and workflows being used just because they had to get done. We're at a different stage now, thankfully, which is, post healthcare emergency stage in health telehealth, especially. And so what we're seeing today is there's a bit of a shift. So during COVID, we had a lot of regulations, and I kind of look towards prescribing laws and regulations as a pharmacist. That's kind of what I focus on. And there's a lot of other regulations that existed pre-COVID, including prescribing, that were very how do you say it? They were very very rigid. And COVID created a lot of flexibilities. So a lot of those regulations were just put to the side as work needed to be done and patients need to be taken care of. And so now we're at the different stage where we're seeing a lot of regulations and a lot of policies coming back into effect. Either they're coming back fully as they were pre-COVID, or there's some sort of adjustment being made. So let's take for example prescribing controlled substances. That's a big one actually. So in telehealth, you have limitations on prescribing controlled substances. One of the requirements is actually you have to have at least one in-person visit before you can a provider can prescribe a controlled substance within their scope of practice. That went away during COVID because there was a waiver. It's part of the Ryan High Act, and so there's an exemption within that act, um, which, as your audience might know, the Controlled Substance Act is that's a big Ryan Act is a big part of that. But the waiver was in place, so now we had telemedicine companies. In fact, we had a bunch of startups come into existence and just start prescribing different controlled substances without that in-person requirement. Well, today we've got a little bit of extra extension on that, thankfully, but we're looking at perhaps going back to some regulatory rule where we may have some in-person visits as a requirement again. It may be different, but it's going to be it's going to be it may be back to sort of a more rigid kind of regulation. And so these are things that are changing right now, and it's not that we it's hard to keep up with the pace of change. I think it's really more of what do clinicians really need to focus on for their practice, so that they can still keep up with things that are pertinent to their practice, and not be distracted by all the other changes that are taking place, with regulation, with laws, and even with technologies. And um, so the Telehealth Success Institute really is built around helping each and every provider and clinician stay up to date within the scope of what they really need to stay up to date with. And just to quickly mention, Tony, we are launching the Telehealth Success book in November, and that really kind of gives anyone who's interested a great primer into all of these facets, all of these 5 pillars of success that we can talk about. Okay, so the Telehealth Success book really has these 5 pillars of success. The first two are patient and clinician success. How do we make each of those roles successful in practice? And then the third is technology success. How do we look at building a technology infrastructure that allows your practice to be successful? Making sure things like you have a HIPAA compliant solution in place, as well as other details. And then financial success is a fourth pillar, which speaks more towards reimbursement and navigating, getting around that, as well as other details. And then compliance success is the fifth pillar, and compliance being really more around how do you stay compliant as a provider, whether it's within your organization or within the sort of medical boards or government. And part of that actually compliance success is what I'm really fond of is the prescribing laws and regulations, and how do you stay compliant within that. So as a pharmacist, this is kind of where I'm naturally drawn to. So this is what I actually speak about quite a bit. And in fact, I'm giving a talk in December at the one of the Telehealth Summit annual summits over here in Greenville, South Carolina. And then next year, I have a few more conferences on the docket to talk about prescribing rules and regulations. So if anyone wants to hear more about that, or even wants to collaborate with me on any presentations in the future, yeah, feel free to reach out.
You're mentioning about the regulations. One of the big things that of course, I'm so limited in what I do compared to what you do. So I just see what's an issue over here where I'm at, which is California. And California has I don't know if it's true or not, but it feels like California has really, really strict rules on prescribing. So
California, funny enough, is actually one of the most progressive states out there for telemedicine prescribing.
Yeah, yeah, but it's like there's just a lot of, like, I guess it's thought out, right? Like, there are more things thought out about it, right?
Absolutely, and to your point, it actually is a good model to look at because, interesting enough, being the only PharmD in my company, but also one of the handful of pharmacists in this space currently, what I see missing a lot well, firstly, what I see missing a lot is pharmacists being at a lot of these events and conferences. So I'd love to see more pharmacists and students, uh, join the space. But what I also see is the lack of topics. So around dispensing. So we have a lot of topics around prescribing, right? Out there, people are talking about prescribing compliance from the prescriber or the provider's point of view. But then you don't normally hear about discussions around, okay, well, once you prescribe the drug or send that prescription in, first of all, are you sending it in electronically or via paper? So electronic, meaning are you electronically prescribing controlled substance? There's systems out there for that now. In fact, there's a lot of EPCS systems available for pharmacies to then capture that prescription electronically and then dispense it. And so we have this layer of safety, um, you know, to keep the system safe from diversion, and that's not being talked about. The other thing that's really not being discussed is dispensing. So what happens when the pharmacy does receive that prescription? And is it a controlled? Is it non-controlled? How many refills is does that state mandate you can give? And so when you think about the patient ultimately getting this medicine, you have to think about what are the prescribing laws in place, what are the restrictions for that, but then also what are the dispensing laws in place, and what are the restrictions that either enable or not for that patient to actually receive that medication and be compliant with it. And so, and by the way, the all of these rules and regulations, there's a federal level to that, but then each and every state may have its own unique rules and regulations, whether it's an actual law put in place by the state or it's something that the medical board governs policy, let's say, but it's still enforceable. There's a lot of variation, and so ultimately, we have to know how to navigate this, both as the prescriber as well as the pharmacy or the pharmacist, helping that patient get their medication.
Yeah, so yeah, that's basically what I was referring to because in California we do have the EPCS systems, and we do have specific California regulations that, I guess like a more, hard example to kind of hear is that we certain, controlled meds are classified differently in California,
Mhm.
and then we use EPCS, and then these EHR vendors like the one that we use doesn't really account for that. So then it becomes a challenge for us to meet the regulations with the EHR system that we have because
Mm.
the EHR vendor didn't really think about, hey, California does things differently, so
There's a
it's
lot of
those kind of challenges
operational
that I live with, so
Yeah, there's a lot of operational challenges for sure, and actually that's a really good one to talk about because it's one thing is how interoperable are some of these systems from one health system to another, and often we find out there's some really major operational barriers. I actually had a father-in-law who's prescribed a pain medication, obviously a controlled substance, C2, I believe, and this was right after he was discharged from a hospital. And one of the things I found out very quickly was the pharmacy that it was sent to didn't actually stock that. I think they were on back order or something. They didn't stock that drug, and so we were like, okay, can we get it transferred over to another pharmacy? Well, that doesn't actually work in practice. Even if there's a rule or regulation that says you can forward that to another pharmacy, which actually there's one coming into the picture here on the federal level. Even if that rule is in place on a technology level, that system is not interoperable with another pharmacy system, and so the transfer cannot take place. So ultimately, what we had ended up doing was contacting the clinic that physician was housed under from the hospital, and trying to. I think we spoke to like three or four different people to then finally get through to someone who could actually prescribe that medication to another pharmacy, so we could get it. So it kind of begs the question, like, how can some of our, rules and legislation out there, how can that align better with, with our professionals on the front lines? And how can it align better with their workflows? So that way, these barriers for the patient aren't there, or they're less, less of a barrier.
Yeah, that's and I commend you because that's the problem that is very difficult to solve. It's not gonna happen overnight, and, we need to have people just, constantly pushing it, working on it, and getting it,
It
moving
is,
to the
and
next step.
and honestly, it's all of us as well, you know? It's and again, this is why I really would love to see more of our, pharmacists, professionals, in this space, and it could simply mean advocating for some of these issues. And so, one really great way to advocate is, some of these policies or rules that are proposed, they're actually available for public commentary. And there's some really great examples of recent past where they open up public commentary for the controlled substance in-person requirement, and there was probably around 30,000 plus comments that were put into that docket. Each and every one of them are read by someone, whether it's an intern or someone at the federal level, and so the 30,000 comments for this proposed rule that I spoke about, that was one of the reasons why we have a year basically of an extension in the flexibilities for prescribing controlled substances. This 1 year is a big thing, but it likely happened because of the amount of comments received. So I definitely urge anyone listening in, if there are opportunities where you can add your comment, and I would say each individual, not organization, but each individual of that organization, because the more counts, the better. Add your public comments, and also give a great story or example of why your comments matter. I think that's a really great way to advocate for better regulations that match our current practice and our operations.
It's funny the way that, it's government, so it's probably similar, but the way that you're describing how the process is, it's very similar to like at a local level. I participate in Orange County Pharmacists Association around here, and sometimes those state regulations for pharmacy law, it's the same way. Trying to get like public opinion or like support, sending letters, all that stuff to kind of like push it through. So
Yeah.
it sounds similar, like a similar process, and but yeah, like when these things come out, like how do you guys hear about it, and how can we hear about it?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Right, currently, I just hear about it through a couple of formats, through newsletters, signing up for some of the federal newsletters, the DA, FDA, a few others, like SAMHSA, I think, a few others that I can think about. And then just like really getting my news through the news feeds on social media, and then through some of my more immediate connections in the industry. But I think that's always been a challenge, is like, how do you stay up to date? And I would say, again, that's probably there's probably a better way to do this, but for now, those are the kind of the main ways I've been able to stay up to date. With the Telehealth Success Institute that we're building, one of the things we want to do is make sure that we have some of these breaking kind of news items, these new legislative updates, all of these kind of resources packaged up well, so that way you don't have to look at multiple like outlets to get your updates on. It's really a one stop shop. So that's the goal, and there's always going to be a lot of room for improvement there. But yeah, that's sort of the goal. Because ultimately, providers, clinicians, pharmacists, all of the above, yeah, everyone's really just busy in their practice and in day to day role. So it's really hard, understandably, to stay up to date.
I'm assuming that people can also follow you on LinkedIn, and then when you post and repost these things too.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and that just goes back to, I think it's nice to have definitely able to have a way to share on a platform that you can self-publish on. So LinkedIn is a great way to get information out to the larger community. I will say it's a great way for others to do the same. So I encourage anyone's listening in, share ideas, share the news that's relevant in your industry because it really helps the community kind of get better with some of this information and get better with maybe advocacy or just staying up to date, right? So I think LinkedIn is definitely a great platform to do that, and also a great platform to connect on. So yeah,
Yeah, and segueing into that part, like from connecting, like when people are looking into trying to move into the space of like some sort of like technology and healthcare, like someone that is working maybe already as a typical pharmacist, or maybe they're a student right now and they're trying to find a career path. I know that you went through a very unique path in terms of like graduate pharmacy school, did pharmacy informatics, went into like vendor side, and then now you're doing telehealth. Is there any like things that you would suggest from your experience that someone can do, or, kinda like, make their path towards that?
I actually was thinking about this question from a student that sort of messaged me the other day, just like 2 days ago, and yeah, I was just thinking about like what are the takeaways here. Main takeaway for me is that there's no right or wrong path. Ultimately, it's really what's your mission that you want to get on. What problem do you want to solve, and how impactful do you want to be? So for me, it was always about impacting patients from a level of how do we leverage technology, right? I think the same is true for you, Tony, right? So we're pretty much aligned on that. But I think the one thing that I've discovered through my journey is well, it's two things actually. So one is getting to know who you want to work for is important. So I'll give you the short story, but it's basically how I got into Doxy.me was actually a little bit accidental in some ways. So the reason I got into Doxy.me was I actually became a patient myself. I went through the patient journey for a number of months, and at the end of that, a road of recovery, I looked at these virtual care tools that I've been using to navigate back to baseline, and they were so impactful to me that I decided, this is really what I want to spend my time working on and helping others with. And at the same time, at the very tail end of it, I actually decided Doxy.me because I accidentally enough had met the founder and CEO Brandon Welch prior to this in a former life. Actually, when I was back at MUSC, I was actually one of his guest lecturers at one of the bioinformatics courses he was a professor of. And so, just knowing that he came from academia was really important to me. In fact, he's probably one of the few companies. He's created one of the few companies that has a large, robust research team within the company that provides novel research for telehealth. We've actually uh, built a large NIH funding program through this team, and so at the core or the DNA of the company is academia, and so just kind of knowing who you want to work for and what kind of impact you want to make. I think those are the two most important things for me that I've been able to take away. So I think those are things to look at really closely because often you will find companies out there that may not have any one of those components, and you could be, you could look at it as, is that a good fit for you or not?
Yeah, I think fit with the company is like a very important thing, because you can always like want this job that's really great and everything, but then when you get there and you're not like a good fit, it really just like brings you down in the role. Like
Yeah,
there's just so much to say about like the people you work with.
absolutely, and the mission you're on. So
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So, like if people wanted to reach out to you directly, like for any more specific questions, what's the best way that they can reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So anyone can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I've actually, I'm open to all connection requests as well as messages. Especially if you're looking to collaborate. Next year, 2024, I'm looking to engage as a speaker or on panel presentations. So if you have an idea that you'd like to work with me on. Love to collaborate. And then also, if you're looking for getting started in telehealth, sure, there's some basics out there. There's going to be the Telehealth Success book that I've linked to on my profile. But, if I highly recommend anyone who wants to use any of these solutions just to try them all out. Actually use them, see if they work best for your needs, your practice. And if you do need any help, the one great thing about DoxyMe is you can sign up for a free account and get a HIPAA compliant call set up right away without even touching base with me. But if you do need some help or some advice around anything we've talked about, feel free to reach out. Always happy to help.
Awesome, awesome. So thank you for being on the podcast. I know you're super busy, obviously, with all your changes and all the a lot of the stuff that you already shared about, like that you're working on. So thank you for being on the podcast, sharing it. And for the listeners, I'll put a link over to any of the content that we talked about, possibly the telehealth success book that's going to be coming out soon. Maybe by the time you guys hear this podcast, it will be out. I'm not sure yet, but yeah, I'll put more information in the show notes for any of you who want to learn more about that or to reach out to Beju. I'll put a link to his LinkedIn as well. But to be respectful for your time, Beju, thank you again so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Tony, for having me, and again, thank you for also being an advocate in our community. You were sort of the one of the first folks I met that really has sort of a pioneer mindset, and really appreciate what you've done with bringing everyone's voices on this podcast, especially. So appreciate your time and appreciate your advocacy.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pharmacy IT and Me podcast. If you did, please rate us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anywhere you're listening to this podcast. It really helps us reach more people who might be interested in learning more about pharmacy, informatics, and technology. If you would like to suggest a topic or somebody to be on the podcast, feel free to reach out to me on social media. I can be best reached on LinkedIn. Until next time, remember, technology is the tool, patient care is the goal.